evening, dear viewers. Welcome back to the Diplomatic Talk program. As we explore the world of diplomacy, we have never really talked about the diplomacy itself. Therefore, as we are heading towards the end of the year, for our final episode in 2024, we will explore diplomacy and its landscape in Uzbekistan. In today's interconnected world, diplomacy is increasingly multifaceted, encompassing not just the state-to-state relations but also non-state actors and international organizations. For Uzbekistan, diplomacy is both a necessity and the opportunity to assert its identity on the world stage, a balanced mix of bilateralism and multilateralism, reflecting its strategic goals to diversify its foreign policy and integrate into the global economic and political system, characterizes the country's diplomatic practice. But before we talk more on this, let's define diplomacy and its historical roots. What is diplomacy? Diplomacy is the art and practice of conducting negotiations and managing international relations by means of dialogue, negotiation, and peaceful communication. It involves the representation and advocacy of a state's interests in the global arena while fostering cooperation and understanding with other nations. Diplomacy serves not only as a tool for conflict resolution but also as a mechanism for economic and cultural exchange, thereby shaping the overall foreign policy of a nation. Early diplomacy dates back to the ancient civilizations such as Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece. These civilizations established formal and informal channels for communication and negotiation with neighboring entities. For example, ancient Egypt used a system of envoys and embassies to manage relations with surrounding tribes and foreign powers. The Romans formalized diplomatic practices with the establishment of the cursus publicus, a courier system for rapid communication across the empire. During the medieval period in Europe, diplomacy became more sophisticated. Rulers sent ambassadors to neighboring courts, often on a temporary basis, to negotiate peace treaties, alliances, or trade agreements. The Renaissance brought permanent diplomatic missions or embassies. Italian cities like Florence set up diplomatic missions abroad, establishing norms of diplomatic immunity and formalized negotiations. The Peace of Westphalia marked a turning point, introducing the concept of national sovereignty and non-intervention. In the 19th century, the Congress of Vienna institutionalized multilateral diplomacy with periodic congresses to resolve conflicts and stabilize Europe. The 19th century saw the establishment of permanent embassies in major capitals staffed by professional diplomats. The World Wars reshaped international relations, leading to the creation of League of Nations in 1920, which aimed to mediate disputes to prevent conflict. The Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations further codified diplomatic norms, granting legal protections to diplomats. The end of the Cold War introduced a more interconnected world, with the non-state actors like international organizations, NGOs, and multinational corporations playing an increasing role in diplomacy. The United Nations became a central forum for multilateral diplomacy, dealing with global issues such as human rights, environmental sustainability, and economic development. In the modern era, diplomacy is more about collaboration and communication across borders, reflecting the increasingly interconnected and interdependent world. The integration of digital tools has further transformed how diplomacy is practiced, enabling more dynamic and immediate engagement in global affairs. The early history of diplomacy in Uzbekistan is marked by a blend of indigenous traditions and influences from neighboring empires. The region's strategic location along the Silk Road and its successive empires, Kushan, Samanid, Timurid, and the Mongol-ruled Khanates, played crucial roles in shaping diplomatic practices. These practices involved the exchange of envoys, treaties, and cultural diplomacy, setting the foundation for the modern diplomatic traditions in Uzbekistan. Trade, alliances, and cultural exchange were central to Uzbekistan's diplomatic history, reflecting its integration into broader regional and global networks. These early practices laid the foundation for the modern diplomatic tradition in Uzbekistan, blending local traditions with broader Islamic and global diplomatic norms. Currently, there are almost 50 diplomatic corps in Uzbekistan. The following map indicates the countries that have their missions in Uzbekistan. The list also includes countries with no diplomatic representation. Uzbekistan has its diplomatic missions in 38 countries. For diplomatic talk, this year was full of interesting episodes and moments with its distinguished guests. Let's go back in time and recall some of those incredible moments.
I was always dreaming about traveling. It's the other way around. We are at the embassy of the UAE.
Taking this chance, I would like to congratulate all citizens of Uzbekistan.
Diplomatic service a little bit challenging. At the same time, you have to prepare yourself to serve in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Somalia, and other conflicting areas.
Just a couple of weeks ago, when I was on vacation, they told you in the Alps, I always like history, so I wanted at some time to be an historian.
So I told my son that now we are going to go to Uzbekistan. You know what his first reaction was? His reaction was, "Oh, we are going to the land of Babur." That's what Babur created. He's part of our history. Similarly, Amir Temur. You get to experience new cultures, and at the end of the day, what you get to know is that despite all our differences, how similar we all are.
By the way, I would like to mention about this year's Olympic Games athletes. Outstanding results. After gaining independence in early 1990s, border issues arose between China, Central Asian countries and Russia. They were some of the most critical moments in our diplomatic relations.
Dear viewers, right now we are at the Embassy of Germany.
Every country has its special elements or its special moments in history you're living through. The migration of qualified workers to Europe. Germany is there right now the leading country.
We met with the Akiko Fuji to discuss the cooperation between the UNDP and Uzbekistan. So right now we are at the British Embassy in Tashkent.
I must get fatter to be a person of importance.
Actually, somebody from the president's administration answered to him that Mr. Thomas Tirsch should contact the foreign ministry.
Now let's explore relations between Slovak Republic and Uzbekistan.
The advantage of being a diplomat is meeting many people, making new friends, and helping to develop relationships between countries and companies.
When I was a child, I wanted at the beginning to be a military.
time flies really faster because I feel as if I came here yesterday. As you said, if you are working as a diplomat, every day is a challenge.
I mean, I'm also a human being. I come from a country where we bike a lot. The reform agenda, but in the recent years, the relationship have been very good.
When I was in 10th class, my father used to bring a lot of magazines which featured interviews of women and men who had cleared foreign service and administrative service.
Some people, they think that, oh, you're from the United Nations, you should stop, conflict in some countries in the world. Some of my colleagues within the United Nations, there are places where you cannot take family because of the conflict within the regions or the countries.
We sometimes add to the word diplomacy different adjectives: sport diplomacy, science diplomacy, economic diplomacy, things like that. Economic diplomacy is itself a diplomacy, so that's why we have to clarify the meaning of diplomacy per se. And diplomacy is the form of activity in contacts between states, which serve the idea, the goal of keeping peaceful environment, peaceful conditions of communications and interactions, development of friendly relations, and ultimately prevention of different conflicts, tensions, and wars. We try to attract more investments to Uzbekistan's economy, develop Uzbekistan, and as I said above, to keep friendly relations with other countries also. Currently, the international system is experiencing very troublesome turbulence, geopolitical turbulence related to different conflicts, be it war in Ukraine or situation in the Middle East. That's why for Uzbekistan it was not easy to express any position regarding these sensitive and delicate situations. And diplomacy, had a very serious task and test, I would say, to manage this situation in favor of Uzbekistan, let's say. For instance, put a question: what should be the position of Uzbekistan regarding situation in Ukraine? What should be the position of Uzbekistan regarding the situation in Afghanistan, for example, vis-a-vis Taliban, maybe, and so on. There are numerous questions to which Uzbek diplomacy had to answer. And the way how our diplomacy, foreign policy activity, foreign policy agency managed to go through such delicate, complicated situations is a symptom of success or failure of diplomacy. So we, so far, observe the prevalence of neutrality approach to different situations, sensitive situations in the world politics. Again, be it Ukraine or Middle East or whatever. So Uzbek diplomacy preferred to keep relatively neutral position. Uzbekistan should not keep a neutral position regarding different concrete situations, be it Ukraine or Gaza or Afghanistan or others. First of all, Uzbekistan never declared officially its neutral position, never. For instance, the neighboring country, Turkmenistan, did. They declared officially their neutrality yet in 1994. And this neutral status was officially registered by the United Nations. Uzbekistan never declared such a status. So that's why we are not neutral country. But in fact, in the real life, let's say, very often Uzbekistan demonstrates something reminiscent of neutrality, neutral position. So I think it's not the best option for Uzbekistan. I think Uzbekistan should not be neutral. Again, from the diplomatic point of view, what should be done? Should we openly and strictly criticize Russia for its war in Ukraine, against Ukraine, or express criticism towards Israel for its war in Gaza, against Lebanon, or other things? What should be done? Again and again, for our foreign policy, this is a litmus test, I would say, to test how strong our foreign policy agency is, how strong our diplomats are. That's why, in the end, answering a question, what our diplomacy managed to change, I think just a little, because of this preference to a neutral position. We are all members of the United Nations. 193 countries of the world are all members of the UN, and UN adopts some resolution, we have to comply. And that's why we might say, well, as a member of the United Nations, we have to follow all the rules, all the principles, all the resolutions of the United Nations. Even our constitution declares that international law stands above national law, national legislation. United Nations itself now is passing through very painful, I would say, very complicated stage in its history and its development. Being created right after the World War II in 1945, still it remains a product of World War II. Every time when we pronounce United Nations, it reminds us that time, World War II period. And since then, neither the Charter of the United Nations, no other forms of activity, peacekeeping operations or resolutions, or even the structure like Security Council or General Assembly faced any significant transformation or reform. That's why over 80 years of its activity, almost 80 years, next year we will celebrate this jubilee, 80 years of its activity. I think time has come for deep fundamental reforms of the United Nations, first of all. And it's not by accident that just this year, 79 General Assembly, September this year, on the agenda, the reform-oriented, reform-targeted issues were put. I mean, they were formulated in a way that in the nearest future, United Nations must launch deep fundamental reforms. Look at the documents adopted in the 79 General Assembly, September this year, you will see that now United Nations does recognize that time has come for reforms. Despite the critical situations, despite the crisis which the UN is facing today, everybody recognizes, yes, it's a crisis. Despite this crisis, still countries of the world relate their hopes, and we do as well, hopes for upcoming reforms, because no other way. We have only one global and universal organization in the world, only one global and universal organization. It's the United Nations, no more, no other organizations. And that's why we do relate our hopes, all our hopes with the UN, hoping that in the near future they will really reform this unique organization where all the countries of the world are the members. So, speaking concretely, if you look at the history, especially the recent history of the United Nations, its activity, you can really notice that some successes were achieved, indeed, be it in the form of peacekeeping operations, adopting the resolutions with respect to concrete situations of war and conflict in the world, be it a situation in Afghanistan or Ukraine. They did adopt very serious documents, resolutions. So, I mean, UN is working. UN is working. But how efficiently UN is working is an open question. It's another question. As you know, several years ago, Uzbekistan president initiated a unique and new form of communication, interaction with neighboring countries. Since 2011, Uzbekistan, together with other Central Asian neighbors, are engaged in so-called consultative meetings. In 2018, there was first consultative meeting, which was held in the capital of Kazakhstan, Astana, and one by one in each Central Asian country, consultative meetings took place. So this year, again, after the full round of 5 consultative meetings were over, again in Astana they met for the 6th consultative meeting. And what I observe throughout this consultative meetings year by year is I'm a little bit concerned about the dynamics and the content of the consultative meetings, because look, how can we judge about them? Look at the documents which they adopt, in particular so-called joint statements, or after the 4th meeting they adopted even a treaty which with a very ambitious title on the development of Central Asia in the 21st century. So it was designed for the entire century. And this year, in August of this year, after the 6th consultative meeting, presidents adopted another document which is also unique by title. Conception of the cooperation of Central Asia until 2040. For cooperation, you don't need any conception. Cooperation takes place with all countries of the world. We do cooperate with China, with Vietnam, with Japan, with Russia, with America, with Europe. It's cooperation.
Diplomacy serves as the bridge connecting nations, enabling peaceful coexistence and collaboration in the increasingly interconnected world. It is the language of cooperation where differences are acknowledged and common goals are pursued, making it indispensable for peace and prosperity on the global stage. In our diplomatic talk, we get the opportunity to talk and gain knowledge from those who represent this difficult but at the same time interesting field. This year was very productive for the newly established program. This is just the beginning, so stay tuned to see more unique and incredible stories of diplomats. On behalf of Uz Report TV, I would like to extend my warm wishes to our viewers and wish you all the best in the upcoming 2025. Thank you for joining us on this diplomatic journey. Happy New Year! See you in 2025.